Thank you for our early joining folks. Before we get started, if you have any burning questions you'd like to learn about OKRs or any clarification as we go along, please put them in the chat window or the Q&A window, and we'll address them as we go along, but there will be some time left over for a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. We have a few folks joining us. We're going to allow some folks to wrap up a few meetings. So we'll start here in about a minute or two. And thanks for joining us today. Waiting on a couple of more folks to join. Thanks, Brian, for the beginning question. I think we can answer that as we go along here. All right, let's kick things off. Hello and welcome to Setting Up Your OKRs for Success in 2022. Today is Thursday, November 18th. My name is Dalen Walton, and I'll be your host and MC as we go along here. We'll get things started on the slideshow. So today's agenda, we're going to meet the speakers, Veronica and Wendy. We're going to tell you a little bit about Icon Agility and Allyio. We'll get right into the presentation, and we'll have some time left over for a Q&A at the end. If you have any burning questions about OKRs in general, or Agile, or business agility, or organizational change management, please put them in the chat and the QA, and we'll try to address them as we go. So I am not the two ladies on the left. I am the guy on the right. My name is Dalen Walton. I'm an Agile Engagement Manager at Icon Agility. We are a consulting company that does a host of services around agility, business agility, OKRs, organizational change management. We are the people, and I will let Veronica and Wendy introduce themselves.
I'll go first. My name is Wendy Patfong. Welcome everyone to this webinar. I am a Strategic Services Manager at Allyio, and my role is very much working with leaders, with champions in terms of how to properly implement OKRs within their organization, but also making sure that you're getting long-time success with it. I spent the last 10 years in the OKR space. Previously, I was with another organization that looked at OKR and performance management more closely, whereas here at Allyio, we're looking a little bit more at strategy to execution. So definitely loving this OKR space, but also being joined by Veronica and Dalen has also been fantastic in terms of looking at how OKRs can be applied by using more of this Agile framework. So I'll let Veronica introduce herself too.
Thanks, Wendy. And I love OKRs just the same. And my focus has always been on, as I call myself an outcome-oriented agility coach, I help leaders and organizations that have a desire to shift from output to outcome-centric approaches and really go through the hardest part when it comes to adopting agility, which is the people side. And so really creating that connection, I found the value with OKRs of when we talk about strategy, people, and process, and you'll learn that soon, of the importance of how we can actually approach this in a way that makes sense for us as we go through that journey of what we call new ways of working out there today. And so I'm really excited to talk about this session because we're approaching the next year. And I can't really stress this how much I work with leaders, even just today and this week on this very conversation is how do we talk about change with our people? We know how to do processes. We know how to do all these things, but the people side is so darn hard. And there's a beauty about when we talk about successes of OKRs, how that actually can help.
Thank you, Veronica. So let's start a little bit about ICON itself. So ICON is a Safe Gold SBCT partner. We do transformations at scale, agility at scale, but also we have a consulting practice around OKRs. So we coach and do certification training. We set up internal OKR practices inside of organizations. And if you've tried this approach before and you've maybe stumbled a little bit, we're experts at restarting and revamping stalled OKR initiatives inside of companies. Now I'll let Wendy talk a little bit about Ally.
Yeah, Allyio is an objective and key results platform that connects every employee to your biggest organizational priorities, alignment, learning effort, and output into actual outcome. So we are based in Seattle, around like 300 plus employees, and a couple of months ago, we got fantastic opportunity to team up with Microsoft. So we're now a Microsoft organization, but our goal is still the same in terms of very much trying to solve, all of our customers' complex business challenges by very much connecting goals to execution.
Thank you, Wendy. So let's get into it. Setting up your OKRs for success in 2022. So first off, are you an outcome or a output-based organization? Do you know what that means? So we're going to have a little poll here before we get started. And if you don't know the difference between the two, it's okay because we're actually going to tell you. So take a second, please enter your input into that poll. And now I'll give it to Veronica to kind of explain what is the difference between outcomes and outputs and impact. And how do we know if we're doing A, B, or C, or none of the above?
This is $1 million question out there. And we know that naturally in organizations, we've been functioning in outputs. And the reason why is because we can wrap our heads around, it's more tangible. It makes us feel more comfortable. And when we talk about outcomes and impacts, it's really unpacking all three of them in truth. And part of what we always know and what's easy is getting into the execution of the things that we need to do, those tasks and activities, right? That's easy for us to associate. But in order to really understand the result of what we're trying to do, which is the impact on the left, there are certain things that need to happen, and outcomes are really about the short-term effects of the changes that need to happen. And so those of you that might be in product or in marketing, we talk about this a lot when it comes to customer centricity of behavior changes, right? We want to understand our customer and the behaviors that we are trying to create or change to solve their problem or create an opportunity that will drive particular business results, right? Our strategic intent. And so when we think about impact, you can look at it a bigger picture of why do we exist as a company? What are the business results, our intent that we want to do? And what are the things that we need to actually change in certain behaviors, right? It could be our customer or employees internally, or what we need to do to work with our internal partners. And then we start peeling the onion further to say, okay, what are the tasks and activities that are going to actually get us there? And that is the clear difference. Outcomes is extremely important because it gets us to start thinking about what we need to achieve in order to get a result. And that's the big difference between outputs, outcomes and impact with folks out there. Now, it looks like in our poll, we have about 26% organizations still working in output, where there's about 52% of you that are actually in outcomes. And so very kind of curious of all of you out there is that what you thought it was, those of you that are working in outcomes today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat.
And like while people put their thoughts in, I think one of the big things, especially on the OKR side as well, is we encounter the same thing, right? In terms of a lot of people think that when they're putting the output, they're doing OKRs, whereas the concept of objective and key result is very much looking at sort of like the in-between between impact and outcome. And often people do ask like, so what is the real difference, right? So we were to put it in an example. And I always love to use like the personal example that all of us have had at some point in time, which is to be in better shape. Right. So what does be like a lot of people then think about, okay, well, what I need to measure is, how many times I go to the gym or like how many times I eat out, but these are actually output. Right. So what a lot of people haven't really taken the step back in terms of looking at what does being better shape actually mean? So first of all, what is the impact, right? So why is being in better shape so important to me? And often being able to look at, well, I actually want to live a more fulfilling life. That is the actual impact, right? So the way to be able to get to going to more fulfilling life is, for me, I might want to be in better shape, but how do I define success, right? So if it was to ask this question to all of us on this call, what is being in better shape for all of you? Everyone has a different answer to this. So imagine that in an organization setting where we talk about, we want to be number one in our category. Everyone has a different definition of what that means. So you're having everyone been busy. The answer is yes, we have so many things to get done, but do we know why we're doing it? Do we know what results are we actually trying to change and are we trying to impact here? And that's where being able to really distinguish between outcome and output is really important.
And definitely, and I get this a lot when we say the word business outcomes. And they're really not talking about an outcome. They're actually talking about a result. And so a lot of these words get highly confused out there because whenever I hear people go, what are the business outcomes that you want to achieve and why Agile, right? They'll say predictability. And I have to say, okay, well, what about predictability? Is that a result you want to get? Is there a business impact in that? And what really is the things that you need to probably change in order to get there? Because when we start to think about, and we go into the next slide, it really starts to peel the onion further of what outcomes really mean at the end of the day. And so we talk about the outcome-based thinking, that there's two types of customers out there. And I always point this out because, again, if we're thinking about customer, it could be internal or external. It's so a natural knee-jerk to think outwardly, right? And in a product and marketing, we're thinking what might have you. But outcomes also could be related to us internally. And this is why I use this a lot with modern day change management approaches. And I talk about outcomes a lot because guess who's a customer? You internally, every employee, your internal partners that you work with, because we're thinking about the changes. Everything is about change in behavior with outcomes. And so you can see there's such a natural fit in our world internally, right? And as employees, what do we want to do within our organization and what's happening out there with our customers in order to drive business results or become the organization, to Wendy, your point, that we want to be, right? Mm-hmm. And then the last thing, and I think this is so important, is everything is an experiment with outcomes. And this is probably the key thing. When you switch from output to outcomes, and I had this very conversation today, creating a strategic vision with this leadership team, is knowing that why the desire to become more outcome centric is this whole concept of experimentation. It's huge because when we talk about sense and respond, the only way that you actually can sense something and respond to it is through experimentation, right?
And one of the things that you mentioned, Veronica, that is really important here is that concept of change, right? So a lot of times when, like we hear like these buzzwords like OKRs or even like Agile, like people just think that, oh, it's a one of things that I'm just going to come and implement and it magically changes everything. But why we are talking about internal customer being so important also here is because there is a change in mindset, right? So to your point is suddenly now that when we're looking at outcome-based thinking, we're looking at experimentation. Like you need to try, you need to learn, you need to reflect. And that can sometimes not be a current culture of the organization, right? So often we hear people that will say, hey, OKR failed for me, it didn't work really well. And we often try to peel again, right? Like the layers of the onion and being able to ask, well, at the core of your organization, how did you look at OKRs, right? Was it just all about execution? Was it all about output, right? So we said, these are the things that we need to do. So we turn them into OKRs and we say we are doing OKRs. Or have we really taken a step back and asking the question of what are the problems are we actually trying to solve? Right? We're not in the solution phase yet. We're very much trying to look at what are these 3 to 5 big things that I might want to do to really have an impact. What are those? What does success means to us? And then working backwards to then realize and being able to say, okay, then we know what outcome we need, what output we need to do to be able to help the outcome. So I'm really glad that you mentioned the internal part of things, because I think often people forget about it, right? All of the OKRs is around helping customers, like financial, helping our board of directors, shareholders value. But where does that actually start? That starts culture, people.
I'm actually using it today as part of implementing a new Agile adoption in an organization. And so we're actually using it in a way, in the next slide, you'll start to see here, where we're actually calling it new ways of working instead of change management. And so this is actually a visual that I use today to kind of start saying, okay, when we are thinking about new ways of working and new ways of thinking, we have to take a holistic approach. And so outcomes is in the center. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get is, hey, this is all connected, but it's also connected to what we look at as a strategy, what we look as people, and we look as process. Because here's the thing, I typically get hired to help with a process. And I gave a lot of examples down there in that process bubble. And that's usually what you're hired for. But they don't think about is what are those top things that are actually going to drive those processes. And so the kickoff, what I've done is say, hey, you're missing an element. And if you look at the strategy and you look at people, what is what we're doing? Why are we doing it? And you look at how are they going to drive to that strategy, and what are the people going to do to actually make those processes effective? And so when we start to look at this whole complete, and these are just examples in these bubbles, but it's really taking this holistic approach. And here's what I love about OKRs, because it's so natural and we don't even think about it because we think of it as a process. We are allowing ourselves to create a strategy in a very structured way that actually is, and if we do it right, measurable outcomes. And the objectives and key results are naturally creating this strategy around how our new ways of working and thinking, to your point, in an internal perspective. If you're helping them change how they are moving towards customer centricity, you also can use your OKRs in this way. So that's a strategy circle. Now let's look at the other spectrum of people. Well, if we're looking at people in both ways, our customers on the outside or customers in the inside. And I gave examples here, employee, team, customer, internal partners. They're all people. Mm-hmm. And we start to say, okay, what are the outcomes that we're actually trying to drive? You use this in your whole structure of when you're creating your OKRs. And then we go into the process. You'll see even in that top corner, I have OKR cycle. Is that's a process that makes your OKRs successful, which is kind of the point of our webinar today, right? But look at all the other things in there. It works with it, folks. I've actually can prove that. I'm doing it right now. And so this is part of when we start to look at everything holistically, taking strategy, people, process, and being very outcome focused. It's very natural, because here's the thing that we know about the world population today, folks. Most of the people in the world today, their average change rate is between 5 and 7 years. Yes, 5 and 7 years. And here's another fun fact. The word change makes most people squirm in their shoes. How did that make me feel? Change management, change agent, right? It's that feeling, and it automatically goes in our parts of our brain, which we know the neural leadership. David Rock has his scarf. You can take it. He talks about this a lot when it comes to the reward and where you're going to put people in a negative or a positive state. And this is why I love OKRs, because there's a direct impact in neuroscience, psychologists, everything, because I'm all into science space these days of the positivity of goal setting. And when you actually create challenging goals, it creates motivation in people moving towards it. Now, there's obviously the behavior changes is the most challenging part of making a goal successful. And so that's where the outcomes come in. And so when we look at this diagram here and we take it and look at it in a very holistic view, you're increasing your probability, which we know in data today, there's a 70 to 90% transformation failure rate out there today, folks. 70 to 90%. We don't have enough data about OKRs yet, but we can say that with agile transformations today with confidence because we've been doing it enough. But I've seen a lot of similar patterns because guess what? We're looking at OKRs like a process the same way that we're treating transformations out there, hired for process. And so part of this is really when we talk about success going into the next year, are you taking into account all of these pieces that we're showing here today?
Absolutely. And I think as we're talking about OKRs in itself, Dale, and sorry, like I was just going to introduce this slide itself, is we thought we would want to go back to basic and making sure that we all understand what OKR is.
So we're going to another quick poll, and I would say during this presentation, we are going to be putting in digital assets into the chat. We will send you links to all this at the end. So previously, we have a digital asset that we put in called "Connecting Your Daily Work to Business Goals." So these are guides and templates you can use and take with you to use in your organization. So right now, quick overview of OKRs. Are you using them right now? It's okay if you're not, if you're using KPIs or MBOs or anything in between. So we want to talk a little bit about this, a little briefly about what OKRs are and give you some more digital assets for how to create and use them in your organization.
So we have about 43% of you
using
OKRs today. Awesome.
And we also have around 27% that's trying to get started with OKR.
So guess what? You're in the right place, folks, because we're going to talk about for you to set up for success, if I can say the words right.
So it's very much what Veronica was talking about. Sorry, Dana. I was just going to say that OKRs is very much around a goal setting and strategy execution system that helps drive alignment, agility, and impact. And I would love for you, Dale and even Veronica, to talk about where does Agile fits in.
Briefly.
Oh, go ahead, Dalen.
I was going to add just I was going to say briefly in OKRs, it's important to say what OKRs are and what OKRs aren't. I think where people sometimes get confused is OKRs are not meant for, let me back up. Everything in your business organization doesn't have to be an OKR. OKRs are supposed to be aspirational. They're supposed to move the needle in your organization. The stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis to keep the lights on or business as usual doesn't need to be put into OKRs because you're going to do that anyway. So
those are really your KPIs.
The people get confused at the beginning is they make so many things that you got to be responsible for, and people get confused and get a little OKR fatigue, I would say. But go ahead, Veronica.
Yeah, and I love where you're going, Dalen. And I think we talked about that in our last webinar. Those of you that haven't seen it, check it out. We did talk about, I think, the difference between OKRs and KPIs back then. And so we naturally have this tendency, even in Agile, that it ends up being this third arm, where it's something not integrated in your everyday. So this is why I put that in the visual, new ways of working and thinking, because it's not something independent. It's actually something that's integrated in the way that you think and work in your business. And so when we talk about Agile and we talk about OKRs, if you look at in the diagram that I shared previously and talked about in the slide, it's really integrated in the way you think and act about things. OKRs is a strategic framework. And so there's a lot of ways to put some sense and logic into it, right? And so when you are going through an Agile adoption, there's always some strategy that you have to put in place. You have to kind of create a vision. You have to answer why. You have to start putting some plans. There's a strategy. Well, OKRs can be very complementary to the strategy of your change, which I was alluding to, and also your work of driving your business strategic intent, right? So the artifacts of what you're actually serving out there to your customer base. So there's two ways to look at it. And so when you talk about what's the difference between OKRs and Agile, it's a symbiotic relationship, folks, because what happens here in your agility and trying to create new ways of working, you're putting a strategic wrapper around it. And here's another beauty of it. If you didn't catch my little hints, drop of hints in the first thing, it's a goal setting technique, which we know all the science out there tells us. It's a positive forward toward state that naturally motivates folks, where you don't really necessarily always have to create this change management language. It's creating that framework of the new ways of working in a very strategic way. We put really very clear results and how we're going to measure it, and then allowing some of those actions and activities that are required. And when we do it and we write it in a very outcome-centric way, we're naturally talking about behavior changes.
Absolutely. And I think especially as we're looking at, coming at the end of 2021 and the start of 2022, this is where it's really important, again, to go back in terms of the why, right? So go back in terms even of the impact. So with a previous slide, we talked about starting with the purpose, the vision, the mission, the core values, right? So it's taking that time to look at a little bit of what have you done for 2021 that is having an impact on your organization, right? So where have we fall short? Where have we done really well? And when we look at OKR in itself, and the reason why a lot of people are gravitating towards the methodology is because there is two parts. One is the objective of what are you trying to accomplish? And we always ask the question of why.
Yep.
Right. So why are you trying to do these things? So even something as simple as, well, we want to drive a higher attendance for our conference. We want to be able to ask, why is that so important? Right? Is it the revenue side? Is it that we want to be seen as the expert in our industry? So why is that driving of the attendance so important? So this is where we want to be able to drive that in and create that purpose that Veronica talked about is, I want to understand why I'm coming to work. Right. So having that outcome in terms of this is the impact that you are going to have for your work. Right. And this is what our company is really striving towards is really motivating. It gives me that sense of purpose. It gives me this excitement of I'm coming to work every day. But the biggest thing is around the key results is how do we measure outcome? How many times have you joined organization or been in an organization where everything is so subjective? Oh, we think we did really well, or we could have done better. But what does that mean? Let's put it on a scale. Let's make it objective, right? Let's understand what is our baseline and what do we want to get to.
We probably should have had a poll as how many of you are actually measuring effectively out there today in your organization. I actually had a conversation with someone recently that most of the organizations they talk to is they're not necessarily measuring everything, right? I know in when I go into organizations and I'm helping them in a more advance their product practices, analytics are not even in place yet of measuring the things that they're building. So I know that's also a challenge out there today. We have the people, and then also the measuring piece. So when we talk about what these elements that Wendy, that you're sharing, the objectives already has impact in there. So we talked about outputs, outcomes, and impact. When you're writing your objective, there's a reason why the last piece of it is business impact, because we want you to start thinking about the impact it's going to make. And so that's why there is a structure on writing those. And when you follow that and you think of the impact and then those results being measurable outcomes, you're naturally moving yourself in that direction.
Yeah.
And so this is why I love it. And obviously, I think it's quite obvious that I love it, but it's because I see the logic in it, and how much easier it is when we talk about the word change. And it could be change in what we need out there and understanding our customer, or internally of what we're trying to do when we are changing our ways of working, right? And we're working with a lot of people, right? So it's still the same concept, because either you need to get to understand your customers, and that's where experimentation comes in, or you're trying to understand your internal people and get it right to achieve the goals that you want inside your company.
Agreed. And
I
think,
I was going to jump in.
Sorry, go ahead, Dalen.
No,
I was just
jump in. I love delays. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for any change that goes, there's that whole process of reflecting. And I think often that is the piece that's missing. And I think that's what we really want to reinforce in this webinar. So I think, Dalen, if you want to move on.
Which is huge, because part of experimentation is validated learning, right?
Absolutely.
I was going to add, so we're putting some really good assets into the chat. You get links on this, but we have in the chat secrets to OKR success, OKR templates by persona, so these are all separate, by marketing, by HR, by product, by engineering, as well as OKR examples by department. All these are free to download. You will get these at the end of the webinar. But one thing I did want to add, and touching back on what Veronica's slide earlier about everything is an experiment, if you take nothing else from this webinar, all of your goals and your OKR should be created. If you remember your Science 101 back in 6th grade or 7th grade, all your goals should be constructed by using a hypothesis statement, which means we believe by doing X, it will result in Y, and we will measure it by Z. It's a super simple formula, but if you do that for all of your outcome and impact-based strategic planning, you have a clear alignment on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to measure what good looks like.
Exactly. And that's why we've been moving that way towards marketing and product practices out there today. And I know that when it comes to OKRs, the business side of the house, in truth, are the earlier adopters of using OKRs just for that reason, because it makes sense to them. I think the laggers are probably other areas within the organization because of that natural closeness, right? You're closer to the customer. And so you start adopting these types of practices sooner. But it still doesn't take away to your point about validated learning. You only know what you know. And if we're not reflecting, how do we know that our OKRs were actually successful, and how are we actually learning to improve on them? And so this piece of quarterly review and reflection is vital. So we learned this in Agile practices, right? We owe in Scrum, any type of, even lean, Kanban practices, scaling, you name it. There's always something about inspecting, adapting, continuous improvement, and having this learning cycle. The same thing applies to your OKRs. It's the same thinking. That's why there's a lot of similarities when people say, what's the difference between Agile and OKRs? Well, it's highly symbiotic because there are complementary practices that have been taking off from each other, right? Lean startup thinking, for example, you'll see these cycles and what might have you. So all of it is key and important that you can bounce off each other. So those of you in the Agile world, you're adopting OKRs. Okay, take those Agile learnings and ensure that you're actually putting them in OKRs. Oh, you're doing OKRs. Well, you can adopt some of those great Agile practices to ensure that your OKRs are successful as well. It's a different way to look at it. and see those opportunities and options of how both of them can be quite symbiotic with each other.
And I think the
So
next
as we
slide
get into-
very much, oh, Dylan, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm always running over Wendy. I'm sorry.
No worries.
So,
I was just going to say, and the next slide very much talk a lot about what Veronica was talking about is when we implement anything from like, you know, like what she call like a strategic wrapper. I really love that, especially with Christmas coming around, is there are definitely a lot of elements that go into it. And what we're showing you on this slide here is, first of all, it starts with people, right? So we've been hammering that in everyone's head right now. People, people, people. But also the three things that I want to point out here is, first of all, is the business rhythm, right?
Mhm.
So with anything that you do want to implement from like OKRs, and even with that fantastic formula that Dalen put in, is there needs to be a rhythm around it, right? So we are not only going to use it once at the start of a year and then stop it, right? It needs to be part of your day-to-day. It needs to be ingrained in your DNA at some point. The second part I want to talk about is the learning and development, exactly what Veronica was talking about, that validated learning, right? So it's the same thing when you're doing your personal goal setting at the end of a year or at the start of a year. If you're not learning from what you're currently doing, how do you know, how do you become even better, right? How do you know you need to change? So it comes back to the last point, which is the feedback mechanism. Right? So how do you get that feedback? How do you know, how are you doing? How do you know when should you be checking into your progress, right? So there's a lot of this element, and all this element, like I'm going to put it out there, comes from the people side, right? Technology can only give you so much data, so much information, but without the context, the number in itself means nothing.
It's probably why
to dovetail,
people side
I
more.
was going to say to
anything.
dovetail, yeah. Sorry. I was going to say to dovetail on that, are you looking at both the people side and the business side of the equation? I mean, so we talked about earlier about a lot of OKRs are focused on revenue, on shareholder value, on customer success. Well, do you have OKRs to add value to your internal organization, right? I mean, business is great, but it doesn't work without the people. What are you doing to increase the value of the organization itself? I think Richard Branson has a great line. He says, train your people so they can work anywhere in the world, but treat them so they won't. There's a lot of value in that.
No, awesome. That's good to hear. And here I'm going to tie back because I want to make sure that we're doing the connecting the dots in the earlier question about Agile and OKRs. You may already see it in this slide, but if not, I just want to connect it for you just in case. And if you look at business rhythms, we have Agile rhythms, right? We have their cadences, we have what have you. When we are adopting Agile, we want to know the business rhythms because again, we want to make our Agile adoption seamless to your everyday business. We don't want it to feel like a third arm. So if that's not happening, then obviously that's an opportunity. But if you look at OKRs the same way, when Wendy was talking about business rhythms, we can actually associate it to your Agile cadences as well. Again, symbiotic. It's integrated and seamless to new ways of working and thinking. All of it is. And again, going back to that diagram that I had, if we take all of these elements together and always look at a holistic approach, it will be integrated. When you're only looking at it as process only, that's where it starts to break down, and that's where it becomes challenging.
So going back to the Agile Manifesto for you Agilists out there, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Listen to the organization. You need to have a feedback mechanism to do improvements and continuous learning and improvements and feedback inside your organization, not just on the customer side. So the important question of this is, do you have baselines for your culture? Do you know what good looks like? I mean, we all talk about the great resignation or the great attrition in the world right now, as a lot of companies are asking for employees to come back to full-time in the office, and I think the overwhelming sentiment is no. So I think that genie's out of the bottle. So how are you going to do outcome-based approaches to lead to greater engagement and talent retention? What did we do wrong previously that we try to fix as an organization? These are really important questions to ask your organization.
And process isn't necessarily going to help you. All right. And so this is where I know, Wendy, you could be smile ear to ear. It's really about the people and understanding what's going to motivate them and align them. And hey, it's always related to impact. And that's one of the things why I said the strategy wrapper, because we want to have confidence that the things that we're doing actually drive to our strategic intent. Because at the end of the day, we are a business. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right things at the right time. And regardless where you are, we're still going to have these challenges, hybrid and remote, and we're not really sure how things are going to shake up. Everyone thinks they know, but we don't really know yet. But this part of it, individuals and interactions over process and tools, is what's going to set you up in 2022 for more success, because you're thinking of it in the right angle. Because no matter what process, no matter what tool or what changes, if the individuals can interact in an effective way and in a smart way, right, focusing on the right things, that strategic wrapper, and also are validating to ensure what we thought it's going to be actually happened, we can change our processes, we can change our tools, we can change our environment, and we're good to go on that people side.
Yeah, and then when we're looking at, so there's a lot of great tidbits to take away as well, right? But you might wonder, okay, great, like we understand why, the people side is so important, like why we're looking at business rhythm. So where do you even start, right? And going into the end of 2021, what we would very much encourage you to get into is a reflection part, whether it's end of a year, it's end of a quarter for you, but it's taking that step back, right, of looking at what have we really accomplished, right? From the people side is people want to celebrate their wins, right? This is where the positive reinforcement comes in, but people also want to grow. They want to learn and they want to know what have we not done so well that we could have done better. So we always recommend, and I've seen some companies that will actually spend, half a day just to go through the reflection of asking, what are the 2 to 3 great things that we have done, right? And the poll that you see here is, we want to know for you for the course of the year, how often do you have this reflection and review? How often are you asking your people, what have we done really great that we're so proud of? Right. So if we had to have that 3 sort of like top 3 things that we are the most excited that we have accomplished, what are they? Right? Because you want to repeat success, and also asking yourself, what are the 3 to 5 things that maybe have not gone so well for us, that in hindsight, what could we have changed? And very much look at what they are, because when you're looking at 2022, it's easy to look ahead. It's easy to already think about your output of, oh, these are the great projects that I want to work on. So I'm going to turn, yeah, it is. And what is a little bit difficult when we talk about change, and when Veronica was saying that, people cringe when they hear the word change, is because we want people to start thinking about it in a different way, right? So if things have not gone so well, what are we committing ourselves to do to change it?
And right? I love going with celebrations, Wendy, because we learn this in life coaching. This is why I always believe bringing the benefits of life coaching to organizations. Mm-hmm. We celebrate successes. It's one of the things I do as being a life coach, is pausing with the individual. And I do this even as an Agile coach, of getting them to talk about the good things. We're always wanting to self-criticize or talk about how we want to improve or go down that route. But we have to stop and think about, well, what did go well? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because we know in science and we know in our brains, we want to move to that space, the space that actually where creativity and new ideas happen. Because guess what? If we're about to create new OKRs, don't we want to be in that space?
And thank you, Dalen, for putting up the poll. And it looked like a majority of you do a quarterly cadence of reflection. And that is what we have seen. Also, I think science will back it up, is being able to for a whole year, being able to have these multiple touch points. And I'm glad that it's on a very defined cadence, right? To be able to say every quarter, we're going to take a step back and exactly what Veronica was talking about, which is celebrate our wins, but also getting our learning. Having usually like the 3-month cycle is great because it's not too long that people forget about it. Right? But it's also not too short that you don't have time to actually react, right? So after Q1, where I have a lot of like teams that I work with, is they're going to look at where are we at, what have we done, and then be able to do that change on the fly, right? So being that agile of being able to say, okay, we're actually fell behind in Q1. So in Q2, we actually have to rally together with a bigger effort. So what does that look like?
Yeah, and part of those of you that are in the agile world, when I talk about integrating some of these cadences and thinking, you take it, if you look at a quarterly perspective, it doesn't matter what framework you're choosing, it actually lies really well when it comes to a scaling perspective. And then when you start getting down into the team level, right, and starting to think about how do we start creating these actions and moving towards these particular goals, it falls really naturally. And so I've done it in a chain people strategy and a change perspective where it's baked into the team's retrospectives. For example, we've made quarterly strategic growth. We don't use the word change. And so they know what their goals are for the quarter. And so in their retrospectives and what we're doing, they know what they need to do to create new ways of working and new ways of thinking. And so in their retrospectives, they already have that in their minds. And so when they create retrospective actions, it's a natural flow into their work. You can do the same when it comes to your business strategy as well. So when we look at the both sides of how this complements with Agile, I hope those of you that are watching today or the replay, you start to see the commonality and synergy between the two.
And I just want to add, we've put in a best practices for running OKR reviews and retros into the chat. So please take a look at that. I wanted to give you guys a super simple sample agenda. Wow, say that 3 times fast. Super simple sample agenda for retros on how to run a retro, either from the people side or the business side. The one thing I would add to this, if you're feeling brave in your organization, is if you want to really move towards a continuous learning culture, continuous learning organization, send out a short survey after every meeting, which is a return on value. So a 1 being, this was a complete waste of my time. A 5 being, this is the most amazing meeting I've ever been to. So ask 2 simple questions. 1, rank the value of this meeting. 2, how would you move it up a number? That's it. If you're feeling brave, do that after every meeting, and over time, you will develop a learning culture and have more valuable and impactful meetings.
That's actually from one of the books I was reading. I forgot which one. But yeah, it's actually a technique been proven to be effective.
It is a great thing because it's also an opportunity for leaders to really get that feedback, right? So we're talking about, the people side, we're including you leaders in terms of getting that feedback and people looking up to you in terms of when we're talking about that learning mindset, that growth mindset, people want to see how leaders deal with, progress. If an objective didn't go so well or a goal didn't go so well, they want to be able to look at how do you tackle it, right? Is it like the external locus of control of, oh, it's not our fault, it's not us, or standing in front of everyone and taking the accountability of, yes, we dropped the ball. Yes, we realize that, we might have been too ambitious, or yes, we realize that we have a lot of technical or cultural debt that we have foregone for such a long time. And now it's coming and affecting us. So this, I would say that in one of the meetings, I'm glad that Dalen mentioned, the ratings there in terms of the value of a meeting. Is one meeting that I will never forget is our director of sales went in front of a whole organization, and it was one of those quarters that we didn't hit our goal. And he said it from the start. He's like, this fall on me. He's like, I am the
That's
leader of
powerful.
this organization and this fall on me. As yes, there might have been many factors that have affected why we didn't get there, but it starts with me. And that was one of the most powerful meetings I have been in, because I have never seen a leader go up there and say it. But what was most inspiring about it is everyone wanted to rally with that leader to be better, right? People started asking questions from different departments. How can we help you?
I
Right.
love where you're going with, because I have another recent story about a leader when we're creating these strategic growth objectives. He literally said, I don't want to do this alone. I want everyone involved. And so we're actually taking an iterative process to where, yes, there might be a subgroup starting it and seeding it, but he literally said, it's not final until we socialize it with my department. I want their feedback. So there's a misconception just because it's strategic that it stays at a certain layer, and that's not true. We are actually making sure that everyone in his department has co-creation and buy-in to make sure that they feel that it's achievable, right? Because OKRs need to be achievable within that. It's an achievable goal. We actually teach this in life coaching too, right? Same thinking. And so when you have leaders like what Wendy described, or the leaders that know that it takes everyone to create these, to know that something's achievable, it's so much more powerful. And that's that inclusiveness and ownership when we talk about leaders. And also, here's the other thing. He believes that everyone's a leader. And that knowing that when they have goals and they're empowered to actually figure out the actions to drive towards that, he knows that's going to be a natural empowerment tool where some of that burden comes off of all of his direct reports to try to get that change happening within everyone in the organization. So those are just a couple of stories to tell that these are real life things that are happening or have happened out there, that how OKRs, how you use them, and the leaders that are involved in this journey, because again, they should be. That's what I think what we're getting at, in order to make this successful.
So I want to finish up we've got a few minutes left. I want to give some time for Q&A. So if you have any more questions around OKRs or Agile in general, please put them in the Q&A and chat. A little bit more about ICON at the end here. We are one of the first gold SBCP partners to sign up with Scaled Agile. Our profession is Agile at scale. So we've trained over 16,000 people in SAFE. We not only do things in OKRs, but also in Agile finance, value stream management, DevSecOps, even the technical stuff like ADD and BDD, as well as tooling. I'll let Wendy talk a little bit about Ally as well, but please, if you have any other questions regarding the presentation today, please put them in the chat in the Q&A and we'll get those addressed in the few minutes we have.
Yeah, like I mentioned, Allyio, we are an OKR platform that very much helps in terms of helping that transparency, that alignment from top down, but also bottom up. And you can absolutely see what our customers are saying about us, right? With 88% says Ally has helped them create a higher performance team. 77% has said that Ally has helped create a stronger company culture. Of course, these are fantastic stats that you can see, but we won't be able to achieve it unless you have the right process and unless you have the right partner, such as ICON Agility, to be able to help you to get there. So we can definitely open it up for any Q&A.
Looks like we have a question here, or no, that's okay.
So thank you everyone for coming to the demo, or sorry, not the demo, but the presentation today. So if you have questions, Ally, we consider them the tool people. So how do I track OKRs? How do I get reporting on them? How do I get integrations into data? How do I make this easy to use in my existing organization? Where ICON comes in is, how do we get started? How do we even plan an adoption for OKRs? How do we train the people to do this? How do we get them used to this new way of working?
Yeah, and I think some of the questions some people might be thinking of as well, how do we get started? Now, again, if we're thinking about it being a strategic wrapper, there's a lot of ways that we can approach OKRs. And I think the first question is, what do you want to use it for? How is it going to help you? We gave you a couple of options thinking, right, where you could use it to help create more strategic alignment in your agile adoptions, right, and add it into there. You can think of OKRs for change management, right, if that is actually a focus. So there's a couple of ways to get started where you don't have to necessarily, the whole organization is going OKRs. But essentially, when you get started, there are a couple of fundamental things that are extremely important. And that's really understanding where you are as a company and how what that relates to your company's mission, its purpose, and its values. We go through this exercise in Agile, but the vision, the strategic vision is extremely important. And I always say, this is your North Star. And it's so important to ensure, and I call this the to-be state. This is usually what I do, in life coaching is, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel when you're actually there, right? You kind of future pace yourself. I always have to get people to think the to-be state, not the things they have to do or what might have you, because this is probably such a vital foundational thing, because that is when you're writing every OKR, right? Your quarterly OKRs or whatever the cycle that you have, you're always reflecting to that, because that is your North Star and you're inching everything that you're doing towards there. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be next week you're going to get in that vision, but ultimately where you want to go. And that's so important when you say how to get started. Don't skip that piece. Don't skip it.
And I would add to that, the equation that we talked about earlier about we believe by doing X, it will result in Y, and we're going to measure it by Z. The other question you should ask before you start down an OKR path or a digital transformation path or any change management path is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What does good look like? And how are we going to measure that it's good after we fix the challenges that we have? Framing the problem before you start down the path is your 50% of the work is already done for you.
I'm so glad you mentioned that equation, Dalen, because that was exactly what I was going to say. This is where you start, right? This is where you start in terms of being able to clearly articulate, what is your impact, what is your outcome, and why this is where you start. Like OKRs, great, right? Like it is a fantastic methodology that you can reap a lot of benefit, but starting at that baby step is, are you able to clearly articulate, right, what your vision mission is and how are you going to get there? What is the outcome? How do we know we have been successful? It's a lot of work to be done. And often people get really excited and jump into it straight away. But what we really want to think about is, again, going back to basic. And that's what your reflection should be at the end of 2021, right? So what do we say our vision mission is? And what have we accomplished this year? Is this aligned?
Yeah, and that really goes back to that slide of the holistic approach of strategy, people, and process. We naturally want to get to action, right? And go into the process, and we skip some steps. And this is where we trip ourselves up, probably unintentionally, because we want to see results right away, but we don't realize that because of skipping it, we don't have clarity of where we truly want to be. We're just doing. We haven't really defined our B state.
Yeah, 100%. And for all of you that are currently doing OKRs or some form of goal setting, Ally is having this great campaign, which is called Goals Together. So, share it on LinkedIn, share it on Twitter. You can absolutely, share how are you using goals to be able to reach your outcome? Like what type of methodology are you using? And tag, your teammates. One of the great things is you'll get team dinner on us. So whether it's a fancy dinner all together or whether it's a remote one with all of your team members, absolutely feel free to participate. Every time that you use the hashtag Goals Together, we're also going to be donating $1 to Save the Children.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Thank you, Wendy. I was going to add, don't forget that we put a bunch of digital assets in the chat. There will be links to all of those on getting started with OKRs, templates, personas, retros, how to run meetings, everything. So we're going to send you all kinds of great stuff to make your 2022 goal setting hopefully better than your 2021. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. We've got about a minute left, so if there's any last minute questions, we can get those answered. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Yvette, for keeping the chats open. And we hope you have a prosperous 2022. And hopefully those of you that are planning on visiting with family and friends have a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season.
Yes.
Thank you.